recording, right?
I gotta put my drink in the way.
Oh, mine's in the way. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Coffee, Tea, and Meat. And today I am here with Melani. And before we start talking with her, we've been talking about yarn and dyeing and all her wonderful knit projects. I think many of you know that Melani's actually what we like to call our exclusive designer. So she started, I think, with this one, with our Christmas sock, which we still have a couple of kits. We have a Christmas sock, we have a Hanukkah sock, and we have the hybrid holiday sock. And all of these socks can also be made as a cowl. And I've already contradicted myself because actually the very first thing Melani did for us was the cowl, I think. And these are all designed by Melani, and we still have them in the shop. And we have them kitted, and they are really just so much fun. She also did our, what month are we in? June. So this would have been our May Spring Forward Kit of the Month shawl. We released it on local yarn shop day, I believe. And I'm wearing it because, you know, I love it. And so everybody meet Melani.
Hi, I'm Melani.
And we're going to sort of do this the way I do them all, which is we're going to start with some general questions. But you dye for us now. I know you spin, you knit, you're a sample knitter, you're a designer. So we'll see where we go. We'll just take the flow as it goes.
Yeah.
How's that? But my very first question always is how did you start?
So there's a lot of different answers to that. So how did I start in general? My grandma actually taught me when I was younger. So probably when I was about 5 or 6, my grandmother sat me down and I was sitting there and I was mirroring what she was doing. And then she gave me a variegated, super, what is it? The red heart super skein of something that's just like rainbow colors. And she gave me needles and a hook. And then that was it.
And
so
this
I went on my
grandmother
own.
Knit for you,
right?
Right?
Actually, that was her mother that knit that.
Oh,
so
wow.
As I was going through this knitting adventure for me, I found that I'm a 4th generation knitter. And my great grandmother was the one who knit the sweaters. So I found this as I was kind of moving, and it's absolutely I think it's absolutely gorgeous because looking at the detailing, she was able to kind of go in and like reinforce the buttonholes, and it was just awesome. So, but yeah, my great grandmother knit the sweaters. My grandmother actually was a knitter for a lot of more famous designers in her day. My mother also kind of carried on with knitting, but went more into the quilting aspect of it, and I just kind of resonated with knitting. Yeah. So, and then I started at Craftworks in 2020. So it was kind of a COVID motivated relationship where I needed fiber because I had time on my hands. And I actually started with the Hanukkah sock. Then we went to the Christmas sock. And then a year had passed, I believe. And then that's when I did the cowl for them. And then next year we did the hybrid of the two, because why do you only need one? So that's the big thing. I started with color work because I love to draw with colors. I love to be able to create that way. And went on from there. So yeah, that's, I've fallen into spinning my own wool and also dyeing it. So for me, I think it's very important for me to know how to do something from start to finish. And from the sheep to the sweater is really what I was focusing on.
If you see any sheep running around town, be careful. They might be Melani. So you mentioned dyeing, so I'm going to interrupt for a minute. I don't know. Well, we had 5 skeins, so at least 3 of you know that this is here. This is Melani's Stache. That's what we call it. It's one of a kind. She's dyeing, well, for us, I'm going to say. I mean, for herself, because she likes to do it. But we have her yarn here in the store. We have these 2 left right now. These are called Poolside and Happy Accidents. And she happened to bring in a few to show that I'm going to get into the system later today. So here are some more with the variegated and the mini. And she makes gorgeous socks, which I had piles of a minute ago. Hold on.
Oh, yes.
So
this is actually a colorway that I'm working on right now, and it's a self-striping colorway for people who love color but may be intimidated by color work, because that's what I was running into is people were looking at the pattern, wow, that's beautiful, I couldn't do that. And that's not something I want people to think when they're working with fiber, because it's two colors, you get into it, you don't say you can't do something if you haven't tried it. So this is another thing that you can look at, and the colors do the work. I painstakingly went through for you so you don't have to. And these colorways are actually inspired by my favorite ice cream bars as a kid, the Good Humor bars, and strawberry shortcake was my favorite. So this is really, you can knit straight through. I'm actually putting together a pattern for this now. So once this is ready, it's going to be a mini and a full skein with a pattern with included, and you'll be able to do this for yourself. So you'll be able to go through and just knit all the way through. The colors will change for you. This is strawberry shortcake. I just put together, this is chocolate eclair. This is one of my favorites. This is birthday cake, and I'm working on toasted almond right now. I haven't, this is toasted almond. So that's really what I'm working on right now. And that's really what's making me get up in the morning and kind of work with that. So that's the big thing. This is also another one that I'm dyeing up, but I haven't quite said anything about that one yet. But this is going to be next after the one of a kind,
and they'll be packaged like this.
They're going to have the same amounts, but I might make it a little fancier, depending on how I want to show it, because the way that this yarn stripes is much different than anything else. So I want to make sure. So if you like a ball, it would probably be shown like this because you can see that there's striping to it. Because I want to make sure when you look at it, you know what the yarn's going to do. Because sometimes you pick up a skein and you're like, I don't know what it looks like.
Right.
So you can't swatch everything, but I've done it for you. So that's what I wanted to do. So they're going to be the same quantities, but just maybe packaged differently, just so you know what you're getting.
Cool. So you certainly have gone from red heart beginning to learn to knit to absolutely stunning yarn. Can you talk a little bit? Just tell us, how do you, I think we're all fascinated by the process of dyeing, and you're not some big manufacturer somewhere. You're our Melani. and how does that happen? How does that process work for you?
Well, I kind of fell into it because as I was actually doing my color work, I'm looking for where's the perfect green, where's the perfect purple, that shade of something, something to match. And it's really, it came out of necessity because I wanted to make the colors that I wanted. And then I fell into the YouTube gap of people dyeing yarn and the different kinds of techniques that they use to get different effects and going into it. So it got to a point where I would open up my skeins and kind of dissect the yarn and be like, how did they dye it? Where did they put the dye in? And just started to think about it that way. And it kind of blossomed from there. And I fell in love with it because I could create the colors I wanted instead of kind of like sifting through. And that was actually why I started to design too, because there were different elements that I liked in some patterns, but not others. But then the length was great there. The arms were good here. And then it kind of turned into a Frankenstein situation. So I ended up just saying, I'm just going to write my own pattern.
And your very first pattern you told me was this tunic?
This tunic, was actually, so I didn't just write my own pattern. I actually took classes. I took a big course on, like a crash course on how to design your own patterns, how to grade them, how to kind of be your own tech editor as well. And that really helped me dissect what yarns to use, what techniques to use, and really think more independently of, how you're going to construct something from beginning to end. And the first thing that kind of broke, it was my maiden voyage was this tunic that I made here. And it was actually inspired by the Hunger Games because I'm a big young adult novel reader. And it's just kind of going into it. There's the story to it. So we've got the herringbone is because District 12, or there's like District 11, like different districts were in here. And now I'm going to think about it. I didn't prepare that. But this is the first one. And it was funny because I didn't actually release that pattern. It was just something to get things moving for me and to break through that barrier of I've never done that before. And that was very important to me. So actually there were a lot of things that I've done that here's my first, but I never continued with it. And it just helped me break through and and have those different milestones and just kind of celebrated those. So it's funny because I feel like I have my own scrapbook of yarn here. It's like, this is my first this is my first that. And so this was my first pattern here. This was a secondary pattern that used the same kind of technique, but in a more just a smaller pattern, because that one's big and it's heavy. So there's a lot of things to it. But that, I just kind of went from there, and then I found patterns that I like the shape of that. I wonder if I could do color work, and I kind of fell into the color work piece of it. And then from there, falling into more lace work and cabling. So for me, I like to challenge myself. For every pattern, it's a new technique or just a new garment or something like that. And that's how I operate as a knitter too. Every time I pick something up, I need to learn something from it. And that's what my patterns are. Hey, here's a new technique I learned. Here's how I applied it in something that I wanted to make.
Well, you just set me up for my next question, and we didn't even practice that. Because the thing I always like to ask everybody is, I call them mistake stories, but it's what did you learn and what's been valuable, and how do mistakes help you, I guess, move forward, and how do you deal with them? A lot of our knitters and crocheters feel that everything has to be perfect, and they get very, very anxious when there's a mistake. Mm-hmm. Some mistakes have to get fixed because in the hat I'm going to have you help me fix. I missed a cable, and you can tell I missed the left side of it. And some I think you can probably live with. Mm-hmm. So can you talk just a little bit about that?
I am who I am solely because of my mistakes. Because every single thing I knit to this day, I make mistakes in. Every time I sit down to knit, I make a mistake. So don't get hooked on the fact that, I can't make a mistake, because especially those who are very detail oriented, you'll become really good at fixing your mistakes. Because I know there are sometimes, like for example, I was knitting this cowl and then I found out I was up here and then I found out I did some weird color work thing in the first row. And I looked at that and I was like, that's going to be a problem. This is a sample for a store. It needs to be perfect. So I understand that perfectionism. And I ended up dropping down a stitch and going all the way down and coming all the way up. Without risk, there is no reward. But because, mistakes are ways you learn. So going back to what I was saying, I want to learn something every time I knit. And a lot of times it's through my mistakes. So I learned that maybe I shouldn't be casting on when I'm watching something on TV with subtitles. Maybe I shouldn't do lace work when I'm very tired and the lighting's not so great. And those are just things that you learn about not only the pattern, but yourself as a knitter. So the mistakes are there because, it wouldn't be fun without them, because it's something that challenges you, something that you overcome. So yes, there are things you have to fix. Sometimes I remember, here's a big mistake that I made. It was actually in one of my, in that sock, my strawberry shortcake sock. I got all the way down to the bottom and I found out that I cast on 10 more stitches. And I was like, why are my toes 27 and 17? They should both be 17. So I got all the way through a sock and I was like, well, I probably should have counted. So it is what it is. It just makes me laugh because this is just something that's fun, and it can be humbling. It can be inspiring. It can be motivating, because there's certain patterns that you look at. You're like, man, I don't know if I could do that. And then by the end of it, you're like, I wasn't so bad at it, and then you can learn about it too. Like with different techniques, there's always different things to learn from, and that's one of the big things. My first time I did color work, the strands were way too tight. I don't even know where that piece went, but I learned next time that maybe I should increase my needle size, or, there's just different things. So mistakes are part of it. Embrace them, because that's how you learn. If you don't want to leave the mistake, then you better, use your detailed oriented nature and fix it. It's going to take some time to fix it. Some things need to be completely just ripped out. I've done that before too. That's the lesson I learned when you're using indie dyed yarns, that there's going to be variation in color. So what you want to do is to alternate skeins. So I didn't alternate skeins. Guess what I do now? And I had to rip out the whole yoke, and I was like, this is so painful, I can't believe it. And it was actually a fingering yarn, like a yarn like this, and then a a mohair, which is like
Oh,
absolutely
painful.
crazy to rip out. So that was a lesson that I learned too. But don't be afraid of that. That's really what makes you a better crafter, a better knitter. It's something where you see a challenge and it's not a brick wall. It's just how do we navigate around that? And that's something that, that's I think that's more rewarding to go into a challenging pattern, have all of these issues with it and be like, you know what? I was more stubborn than this pattern and I finished it. So that's what I love about that is you look at the pattern, you're like, man, that one really put me through the ringer, but I really learned a lot with it. So don't be too hooked on it has to be perfect. Yes, you should probably swatch a gauge, and I'll probably tell you that in the third question. But there are things you should know, that you come with those, you come with those skills that you've honed in other patterns and just going through it, like your tension and gauge, all those kind of things, just rudimentary in your technical skills. But when you go into a pattern, you start making mistakes, you're just going to laugh because it's going to be a ride, and just enjoy that.
All right. Well, I'm not even going to ask the question. I'm going to have you just go right into gauge swatch and explain why things like this are important.
Because when I write a pattern, it needs to be a certain dimension. So depending on how many rows you knit or how many columns you have in stitches versus rows, you need to have it a certain size. And when I write patterns, sometimes when we put kits together, we give you a certain yardage with the assumption that you're going to be gauging that, swatch. You're gonna be knitting it up, and then you're going to block it however you're gonna block, and that's how the stitches are gonna fall. First of all, block everything because it makes your work look awesome. It makes you look so good. Even if your tension is off or inconsistent, you're like, wow, that looks machine made. This is the machine. So that's the first thing you want to do. But you really want to make sure that you do that for each pattern, because then it teaches you how you knit too and how you work, or crochet as well. If you hold the tension tighter than others, then it's going to give you an idea as to how to address that moving forward. So if it's tighter, then you might want to go for a larger needle gauge. You have to keep that in mind when you look at different patterns. So it really teaches you a lot about what you can do for yourself, but then also make sure that you are able to set yourself up for success. Because I remember there was a pair of gloves that I was knitting for some random pattern that I found on Ravelry. It was free. And it called for 3s. And in order for me to get the actual gauge, I needed 6s. So I would have had itty bitty mini gloves. I would have been like, I can't believe I spent all that time and energy on these things and I can't even wear them. So just giving yourself some time, in the beginning, that really sets you up for success, so that you don't think that you're a failure in knitting or a failure in crocheting because it was just the gauge that was off. It's not anything else but that. So I just want to make sure that if you check those boxes, then you're going to have a better representation of your technique and where you are as a crafter.
Let's continue. I always ask this question one way, but for you, I feel like I want to ask it a little differently, but I'm not exactly sure how. Sorry, guys, I have to process a minute here. What do you wish you knew? Or actually, here we go. I'm throwing you under the bus a little here a minute. You got it. I have faith. What thing did your grandmother was the first one who taught you?
My grandmother taught me.
Your grandmother. What was the one piece of advice did she give you that sort of really resonated with you and made you want to, because I think the seed started there.
Mm-hmm.
And the seed has grown to a massive flower garden of gorgeousness. I wish you guys could be here to see and touch the things that Melani has made. They're just stunning. But what was the thing? Do you know
It's funny because it's going to throw you a curveball right back, because my grandmother was a woman of few words. So what she taught me was figure it out. That was it. She handed me things. I didn't know how to do a pattern. She said, if you want a hat, figure it out. And she taught me the knit stitch. So I'm like, well, a hat has to be round because it has to go around my head. And I just figured it out. And I just went into it and just played. And it was interesting because at a young age, I found something really comforting in repetitive movements. So going through, I actually remember going through and doing the chain, making a chain, using the yarn. So I would go through, you go pull through just with my fingers. I didn't even use the crochet hook. So I'd sit there and it would just be muscle memory. And I would just sit there, watch 60 Minutes with my grandparents. And then I would just be going through and just making these large chains. And then I would make a chain out of the large chain. So it was just interesting because I was learning how that works and how to get that dexterity down. But yeah, that was the one thing that my grandma at the time would just figure it out.
And not be afraid of that.
Yeah. Well, it's also like it's not an end. Like you've got a challenge. It doesn't mean that that's a hard stop. So nothing ever was challenging was not nothing that was challenging was ever an end. Right. So it's because when I started, I might have had a different end in mind. But nothing that I encountered as a challenge was a hard stop for me. With that, there are patterns where I'm like, listen, this is just not going to work for me. I don't like it. If it's a pattern that you just don't like, it doesn't resonate with you and you stop it, that's not a failure. That's just like, listen, it didn't work for me. And that's fine. And that's okay. And it's more of the thought process that when you buy clothes, it needs to fit you. You don't fit the clothes. So when you find a pattern, it needs to fit you. You don't need to fit the pattern. There's so many patterns out there. There's so many things in different ways that they're described to you that if it doesn't resonate with you, you can't kind of figure it out with that, then pivot, go to something else. And one of the big things is I had, you don't have to be monogamous with your we call them whips, your work in progresses. You don't have to be monogamous with your project that you're working on. I have, I think, 5 different projects in process right now. So there's one that I sit and I watch TV with. There's one where I do in good lighting and I'm really good at concentrating. And you just kind of go through with your moods because your projects fit who you are and where you are. So they fit and they fill your needs. You don't need to conform yourself for that. So because something's challenging for you, there's no deficit in who you are and what you are as a crafter. It may be a challenge and a learning opportunity, but if it's something that like, listen, this just doesn't work for me. I've looked at patterns and been like, there's no way I want to knit that. And another reason why I make my own pattern. But yeah, just figure it out. We've got YouTube now. And you can look it up. I constantly look things up just to make sure what I'm referring to is the thing that I thought it was called. Because that was the biggest thing when I came back into knitting was I had all these techniques with no names. So I had to look at it and be like, well, what is this even called? I was like, I'm just sewing them together. I was like, I guess that's a Kitchener stitch. That's a mattress stitch. Being able to go through and like finding words and names to things, just look it up. I would go through and I'd look up every single abbreviation in a pattern because it's a different language and figure it out. Go through and just Google what is SS? Well, it could be stockinette stitch. It could be, there's different things in there. And take that time to learn because it's fun. Like that process is really rewarding and it helps develop you. But if you're looking for like a quick pattern or a quick something, to knit up, I would say definitely find small projects. I would say knit squares and then sew them together and you've got one larger square, and just go through and give yourself as many little wins as possible in the beginning to help motivate you and go through. And plus, if you make a mistake, it was only in that little square. So you can always start over. Yeah. So those are other things to make, just make it smaller pieces that you can have smaller wins. And then you put it together and then you can kind of trust that and kind of trust that and kind of trust that. And that's when you can make big things like this. I mean, there are mistakes in here. You're not going to know it because I'm not going to point them out to you, but I sure know it. And then that's Stormy too. So that was another project. But everything has something you had to figure it out. Everything, just you look at it and be like, well, I hear what they're saying. I'm reading it. Just go in and try. And I mean, the hardest thing is, I mean, it may not work, and then you just try something else and you pivot. Yeah.
Well, I think what's one of the many things that is so fascinating so fascinating about you. Sorry, guys, I'm playing with the unicorn. I mean, come on. Yeah. Is your breadth of what you do. You have really, you design, you dye, you knit little stuffed animals with really cute hair. I mean, this thing is the cutest thing in the world. Is this your pattern or is this on Ravelry?
This is Rainbow Designs. She does a lot of really gorgeous toys that you can knit up. That he's the only one that I actually made for myself. I make a lot of knit toys, but they're all gifts. Most of them are for babies, but Stormy's for me.
My birthday's coming up. I'm just saying.
Yeah, so those, I love those. So yeah, Rainbow Designs she's fabulous.
So knitting can be so many things. I think so many people think it's a sock or a hat or a cow or a shawl or a stuffed animal or a memory. And I think what is so fabulous is as Melani was unpacking everything we have here, and we could talk about this stuff forever, there was a memory attached to each one. Mm-hmm. You knew this was my great grandmother, this was my grandmother, this was my mother, this I designed, this I made for me. And I think having that memory in your items, in your crafting is just it's just really great.
Yeah.
It's just really great. All right. Our very last question.
Okay.
What would you, well, you've kind of already said it, but let's summarize it up. Let's wrap it up. What would you tell someone who either wanted to get into dyeing or designing or just wanted to become a better knitter? Well, you've already sort of answered the last one there.
Just advice that I would give to a budding new crafter. So whatever that craft is, approach it with a completely clean slate, and go through and be like, I can learn everything from this. So just be there, like, I don't know anything, teach me, and just kind of absorb that and be an observer with that. And if there's somebody who does the thing you like, maybe follow them, look at their pictures, look at maybe they have tutorials and things like that. Just go through what resonates with you and like, ooh, that's a cool technique. Let me look into it more. Be curious. Ask those kinds of questions. And I think the biggest piece is try it and be happy to be mediocre because you're learning. And that's a sign that you have, when someone says, oh man, I really messed that up, I just say it's, you have the greatest potential to move forward. You're the best, what is it? The most improved. You have the ability to be the most improved person at that. So it's not necessarily jumping into something and being immediately great at it, because what fun is that? Like, that's not challenging. That's not rewarding. You didn't work to do, to accomplish a goal. Be there and just, you're going to put in the work and be like, you know what? I'm proud of what I've done because it took effort and it took me, focusing and going into that. And here's where it becomes. So it's more of your accomplishments in that. So there's going to be mistakes made. There's going to be lessons learned, and be happy that you had those experiences, and be kind with yourself, because it's not going to be textbook perfect or what you feel is perfect, because you're still learning and you're still growing and adapting, because there's no such thing as perfect. There's always, you can be a little better, and that, use that to motivate yourself to continue on that path, because there's little things that are like, man, I could be better at this, I could be better at that. And there's still things that I want to learn and different techniques that I want to dive into. And I'm happy to be mediocre when it comes in, because I have a lot to work with. And just, yeah, so I would say enjoy that journey, go into it and just expect to suck. And then just, if you did a little bit better, be pleasantly surprised and just keep going with it, because that's what makes it the most worthwhile, is that trial and error and going in and be like, wow, I didn't know where I was going with that, but that looks pretty good. Yeah.
Well, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm feeling like I have to make a unicorn, so I may have to go look for this pattern. I've only ever made one stuffed thing. It was an owl. And this guy is adorable. And Melani, you're fabulous. And thank you for doing our coffee, tea, and meat.
Well, thank
Everybody,
you.
As always, happy knitting.